Story 1. A Russian friend and I were high, and instead of saying, "The shit's hit the fan," he said in a strong Russian accent, "The crap has hit the air conditioner." Story 2. They count the male votes first. How do they know? How do they know what? Which votes are the men's votes and which are the women's? Male votes. Male votes. Postal votes. Story 3. I once heard that ducks have regional accents, and now every time I see one, I wonder if that duck is from New York or Texas. Story 4. I had a coworker tell me that she could only drink Dr. Pepper because she was allergic to water. I disengaged. Story 5. I had a boss in rural New England who called duct tape hippie chrome. He also referred to oriented strand board as beaver puke. Whenever I am dealing with either material, I have to mention these names. Story 6. My father-in-law told us that Powerball is the best way to invest money without a shred of irony. After he said that, I decided never to take his advice. Story 7. George Washington did not own slaves. I then went to an American history website and showed him that he did, in fact, own slaves. After that, he said, well, he probably treated them pretty well. Story 8. Someone laughed at me and treated me like an imbecile because I told them cheese was in cheesecake. They criticized me for how stupid I was. I explained that mascarpone is in cheesecakes and that mascarpone is a cheese. They wouldn't accept it. It was random and very frustrating. Story 9. I was in a national park photographing the moon when a ranger approached to ask what we were doing. I mentioned I was photographing the moon. He replied, "Isn't that going to be a little hard?" I responded, "What?" He said, "It's a big ball of fire," then shook his head and drove off. Story 10. Walking through my college dorm, I heard someone say, "I was going to study." Then suddenly I'm in Canada and the sun is coming up. Story 11. If the Earth were 10 feet closer to the sun, we would burn up. If the Earth were 10 feet farther away from the sun, we would freeze to death. Isn't God amazing? Story 12. I once had a woman argue with me that the Earth is flat and that I was wrong. I am an airline pilot, and this was after I stepped off the plane in full uniform. I told her we can see the curvature of the Earth from the flight deck if we are high enough, but she wasn't convinced. Story 13. A phone call at the library involved a man arguing with his girlfriend. It seemed he was in trouble and trying to resolve the situation. He said, "Baby, of course I still love Sharknado." Story 14. Good wrinkles. I attended a military college. One individual would intentionally leave wrinkles on his uniform, allowing the squad leaders to focus on that and not search his room. It was unwise yet clever at the same time. Story 15. You can consume the seeds of fruits and vegetables. Your DNA may influence the seeds and result in fruits and vegetables that contain the nutrients your body needs. Story 16. This girl in my 8th grade science class asked the teacher, "Isn't the moon bigger than the sun?" with complete sincerity. Story 17. He is very trustworthy has become a joke between my coworker and me. He buys and resells electronics. One day we discussed a potential buyer, and he pulled out his tablet to check the conversation, bursting into laughter. The buyer had been hesitant about almost everything and suddenly asked, "But can I trust you?" via text. I thought, great way to debate whether someone is trustworthy. They will definitely respond, "Nah, I was trying to deceive you, but you caught me." Well, that's awkward. Now, whenever anyone questions anything he does, I just say, "Nah, it's fine. He is very trustworthy." He does the same when I express doubt. It has somehow stuck with us. Story 18. We were on a field trip to a science museum, watching a short documentary about the human body and skeleton in their theater. A doctor there described the phenomenon of humans walking as calculated falling, explaining that numerous physical and anatomical reasons make walking seem impossible for us. Our brains become adept at guessing, and over time, this process becomes fluid. As an ultra-runner, I still think about this at least once during each run. Story 19. This was right after university. My friends and I were experiencing psilocybin mushrooms for the first time and had a babysitter. Unfortunately, he chose to smoke cannabis. Another friend who was on mushrooms made us leave the house before the effects kicked in. As we were on our way to the beach, we began to feel the effects and started to panic, while our babysitter was not managing the situation because he was extremely high. By some miracle, we managed to reach the beach and sat down. A student from environmental studies approached us and said, "This is the breeding ground for the snowy plover. We would appreciate it if you could walk instead of sitting because it makes the birds nervous." We were already anxious, fearing we had been caught for something. Our high babysitter then led us over a fence that clearly stated, "Do not enter." We were unaware of what we were doing, so we followed him. The volunteer sprinted back, yelling, "No, that's the one place you can't step into." The babysitter replied, "Oh, I thought this way was the do not enter." That was the dumbest thing I had ever heard. Story 20. The Clintons drink the blood of babies to stay youthful looking. It even hurts my brain that people believe that. Story 21. I knew this extremely religious guy I went to school with. He accepted everything his beliefs dictated, including a strong dislike for those who identified as gay, as well as swearing, drinking, smoking, and premarital sex. The interesting thing is, he used hard drugs frequently. He claimed, "That's okay, because they bring me closer to God." Story 22. Why do you speak like a Spanish person and not like us? I'm Australian, and I was visiting a friend in Mississippi. His 7-year-old sister asked, "Why do you speak like a Spanish person and not like us?" with the cutest southern drawl. I don't think she had ever heard any accent besides her own southern drawl or a Mexican accent. Story 23. I was walking with a friend into a Best Buy when a young couple was leaving, and we heard them bickering. One said to the other, "Quit yelling at me and making it look like I'm yelling at you." Since that day, we have used that phrase to end every disagreement we have. Story 24. An uninformed friend said, "It's a dog-eat-dog world," instead of "It's a dog-eat-dog world." And I, being a bit particular, corrected her. I've thought about it frequently for the past 15 years. She wasn't wrong. It's correct either way. I feel bad for correcting her. Story 25. A female roommate in college didn't know what menopause was. I also tried explaining it to her, and her understanding afterwards was that your uterus falls out. She was confusing it with a hysterectomy. Story 26. Oh, I have to call my dad and see how he is. He had cancer removed yesterday, but it wasn't the aggressive type. Is there a less severe type of cancer? Well, no, but it's not the life-threatening kind. Isn't all cancer life-threatening? Well, yes, that's why he got it removed. Story 27. I was sitting on a terrace at a bar drinking beers with my father and some friends. The table next to us was occupied by a man and a woman of approximately 60 years old. When the bartender brought their drinks, the man started grinning and said, "Will you tag along to the solicitor? Then we'll force Jan offside. Cheers." He was probably referring to changing the will of one of them for a soon-to-be-expected inheritance. I nearly spat my drink out. It was such a nonchalant way to announce plans for a dubious family double-crossing scheme. This happened about a year ago, and my friend and I still quote that man regularly. Story 28. When I was a teenager in the late 1980s, we lived in a small town. There was a group of people who were always hitchhiking from one town to the next, chasing their next higher party. Among this group was one man rumored to have ruined his cognitive function with drugs. My only interaction with him was when he walked up to me, crossing through people's yards, and said to me with great enthusiasm, "Princess man, princess, those are some bad dogs. Think about it. They go together." I still have no idea what he meant, so if you have any insight, I welcome it. Story 29. Someone asked why Abraham Lincoln didn't protest Donald Trump's victory in the election. I found it hilarious. Story 30. At a party when I was 24 years old, standing with a few friends on a balcony, I pointed at Jupiter, which was clearly visible in the sky. A girl stared at the sky for a moment and then blurted out, "I wonder what stars are." She was completely serious. We all looked at her and I explained, gently but a bit dumbfounded, that stars are like the sun but very far away. The girl remained silent for a moment and then said, I think stars are the spirits of dead people. Story 31. I once overheard someone say, I want you to grab life by the reins and embrace every moment. That should be a motivational poster. Story 32. I was chatting with a group of young men from a strict religious community. When one of them couldn't quite follow how the conversation had turned towards sex, he simply said, "Ah, French class." And it stuck. Story 33. Dolphins are mammals, not fish. Although they live in the water, this does not classify them as fish. Crabs and octopuses also live in water, but they are not fish either. Story 34. We were having a Bible study about Genesis, specifically the first 2 chapters regarding creation. The pastor pointed out that the text states God created light on the first day, but the sun and stars were created later. Someone remarked, "So that's why the day is bright even on days when there is no sun in the sky." I looked at the person with astonishment and explained that on those sunless days, the sun was simply hidden behind the clouds. The person didn't believe me and insisted that those were days when the sun wasn't present in the sky. I stopped arguing for the sake of my sanity. Story 35. What is the difference between Washington and Washington, D.C.? If you are not American, one is a state on the West Coast, and the other is a city on the East Coast that is home to the U.S. Capitol. This question was asked by an American college student. Story 36. Would you rather have chocolate-dipped chicken or chicken dipped in chocolate? Me, 2017, playing Would You Rather at a campfire. Story 37. A person on a furry art site posted leftist furry artwork. It received many downvotes. Someone commented, "Why does Antifa even exist anymore? They defeated the fascists in World War II." This was one of the top comments. Regardless of your political stance, that comment is incredibly ignorant. Story 38. A high school teacher once told the class that the reason the Great Salt Lake is salty is due to underground tunnels connecting to the ocean. This statement was quite misleading. Another teacher mentioned that nobody likes dark-colored drinks. The class erupted with responses like, "What about coffee, tea, and soda?" He was compelled to change the subject. I often reflect on whether I attended a very good school. Story 39. A man who used to live next door to me asked if squirrels lay eggs. He was not joking, he was genuinely asking. I was shocked. Around the same time, a man who lives down the block asked me, "Is it true that Asian cats move side to side instead of up and down?" This was after he saw a girl I was seeing at the time who happened to be Asian, leaving my house. I also thought he was joking at first but realized he was just as serious as the man asking about the squirrels. There are many uninformed people in the world, which is surprising to think about. Story 40. A coworker points up at the sky where the Goodyear blimp is cruising by and exclaims, "Oh my God, a flying boat." She was honestly very sweet and kind, but that one really got to me. Story 41. That person is trouble waiting to happen. It's been over 30 years since I overheard that line from a random conversation beside me, and I still use it every chance I get. Story 42. I was probably in my early teens when my dad and I were driving through a sketchy part of town with a main road. We saw a man during the summer wearing bells on his shoes, spandex, and a mullet. My dad told me, "Every city has its areas." And I remembered that when I worked away from home for a while. Story 43. I was outside at night with my college roommate, and I commented that the stars were pretty. She said, "Those aren't stars, they're airplanes." I replied, "Why on earth would you think that?" She responded, "One night, I stayed up for hours looking at the sky, and they all moved." Story 44. My ex-brother-in-law insisted that Nokia was called Nanook, as if everyone else was completely ignorant of that name. Story 45. When I was young, I overheard my mom joking with one of her friends that boys run with their hands clenched into fists, while girls run with their hands open because their nails are still drying. As silly as that may sound, I still make sure to keep my hands in fists while I run. Story 46. When I went to the doctor last time, he said I had acute bronchitis, but it's probably fully developed by now. My ex's stepmom was unique. Story 47. Overheard a man telling his child that you have to eat Doritos during the Super Bowl because that is the rule. Story 48. With great sternness, a customer once informed me, I cannot sign a quote. I can only approve it verbally. Story 49. A couple of years after September 11th, I stopped on a road trip to eat in northern Nevada. The table next to me had two middle-aged ladies discussing their next stop in Carson City. One lady was worried there could be a terrorist attack because Carson City was the capital of Nevada. I was shocked beyond belief. Having spent significant time in Carson City, I can assure you that if terrorists were to attack, nobody would hear about it, and nobody would care even if they did. That is how insignificant Carson City is. Story 50. If humans evolved from monkeys, then why do monkeys have hands for feet? I'm not looking for a discussion on this. Story 51. My manager at a grocery store told me when I was 16 years old, you just need a paper towel to clean the blood off the floor. The virus would be dead before it hit the ground. Yeah, thanks, but no. Story 52. Heard on the London Underground. A speaker was an American tourist talking about a bar of chocolate. No, I don't want to bite that. It's from France, and you know they put snails in everything. Story 53. If you don't close the toilet lid when you flush, you can get particles on your toothbrush. I had my toilet in a separate room for years, but I still always close it. Story 54. My girlfriend in college, for some reason lost to time, said out loud, that is not even uncanny. I have been saying that to myself once a week for 30 years now. Story 55. Me. I only shower on days that end in Y, but not tomorrow because that ends in W. Girl. Saturday? Story 56. What is the dumbest, most random thing you once heard that somehow stuck with you forever? Everything Donald Trump says. He says them so often that we forget the last dumbest thing we heard when we encounter the newest dumbest thing. Story 57. I'm really into Mardi Gras and New Orleans. I would love to visit during Mardi Gras. I think it is on a Wednesday this year. That was said to me over a decade ago by an acquaintance, and every year I ask my husband if he thinks Mardi Gras is on a Wednesday. Story 58. If I had to drink anyone's urine, without a doubt, it would be Tom Brady's. This was completely unprompted. Story 59. Be kind, even if your kindness is thrown into the river, for this water will nourish trees and plants from which you and your family will eat for generations. Story 60. Welcome to the document management platform. Sexual harassment will not be reported to human resources. It will be given a letter grade. An older colleague from a job I had about 10 years ago once told me that. I thought it was very funny. The team was primarily composed of older men, except for me and another man in our 20s. Story 61. Flat earthers believe that one side of the earth experiences daytime, while the other side experiences nighttime. They have clearly never been to Alaska. Story 62. On the internet, nobody knows you are a dog. I only recently discovered that it's from the New Yorker. I heard it at some point during my childhood, and it stuck with me. I used it recently to explain to someone why I am not sending intimate photos to someone I haven't met. Story 63. Have you ever met people who are no longer connected? They seem to lack reasoning and clarity in their thoughts. When asked for an answer, they struggle to think independently. Instead, they repeat their own version of reality, hoping it will eventually become true. It is difficult to pinpoint a specific issue, and without context, the message often falls flat. Story 64. Dealing with a university graduate at work in my additional role as a first aid officer. The graduate somehow managed to inject a piece of pencil lead from his mechanical pencil into his hand. He came to me later saying, "It's okay. It's not made of the metal lead." My jaw dropped because I thought everyone knew that lead pencils were made with graphite, which is carbon. His time at university was not wasted. Story 65. 15 years ago, someone said, "Slater," instead of "see you later." I still say it, sometimes adding Christian at the end. Story 66. When Daniel Radcliffe was first announced as the actor to play Harry Potter, I was watching the news, and the newscaster provided details about this relatively unknown child. He mentioned that Daniel had recently finished performing in David Copperfield on stage. His co-anchor responded, "So he already knows about playing someone magical." I couldn't believe someone said that on national television. Story 67. It's not our dumpster that is on fire. There is a 3-car fire at Quick Park. I was working at a pizza place near the airport when someone called to inform us about the situation. As far as I can tell, a driver delivering to the location saw the smoke and suggested to the front desk that they check their dumpster. Story 68. When I was 13, I stayed overnight with a friend. We heard her parents talking, and her father said, "They are poor kids, but they are really good kids," as they packed donations for a local family whose home had burned down. We repeated that statement for years to each other, about anyone and everyone, and shared a secret giggle among ourselves. Story 69. Overheard in the staff lounge. Teacher 1. I left some beakers out, but it's fine. They just contain sodium chloride. Teacher 2. I'm almost tempted to let the kids eat it out of the brand new Erlenmeyer flask so they can report on whether chemical grade is saltier than food grade. Teacher 3. I can't believe you. You would let the kids eat chemicals? Shame on you. How do you think the parents would react if they found out you let the children eat sodium chloride? Teacher 2. Well, they probably inhale a lot of it at home since they always come to my class with something full of it. Teacher 1. Next, you'll get mad at me for having them work with dihydrogen monoxide. Huh? Teacher 3. You're letting the kids handle monoxide? That could harm them. Teacher 1. It could harm you too. You're constantly drinking it during staff meetings. Teacher 3. And you didn't say anything? Teacher 4. Fed up. Maybe let the chemistry teachers handle chemistry, and you stick to social studies. Do you even know what either of those chemicals is? Teacher 3. It doesn't matter. Chemicals are horrible for you. I never ingest them. And I think I'll go to administration about what I just heard. Teacher 4. You just sat there with a grin. Huh? Me? Look, I may have only gotten a C in chemistry, but I got an A+ in minding my business. Also, now I want to know if lab grade is saltier than food grade. I've been thinking about it, whether it's the same as that stuff. Demineralized water? Pure acqua dueo. Tastes different. Lab grade water. Now I'm thinking about lab grade salt. Teacher 2. If you come to my room after school, you can taste the lab salt. Teacher 1. Make sure it's sodium chloride, though. Story 70. I remember in high school during social studies when a dim-witted girl asked, "How can Africa be a continent if it's a country?" The teacher looked like he was trying to work something out in his head. He walked over to the old pull-down maps, pulled down the one of Africa, and said, "This is Africa, and these countries make up Africa." She responded that she thought those were states. This was in 10th grade. Story 71. My father's new girlfriend does not like ketchup, which is why I have always disliked it. I have shared this before, but it has not lost its place among my collection of overheard absurdities. Story 72. Being transgender is more challenging than living with schizophrenia because people support transgender delusions. It's a different kind of ignorance than what others discuss, but it still impacts me in a perplexing way. Story 73. When you breathe through your nose, the air goes to your brain, and when you breathe through your mouth, it goes to your stomach. That was in high school too. Story 74. My grandpa said when playing football, "If you can touch it, you should catch it." I have never forgotten it for some reason. Story 75. When I was in kindergarten, a classmate told a group of us at recess that when people got older, boys became women and girls became men. So, you mean it's going to fall off? Sure, Angie, sure. Even at 5, I knew that was not true. Story 76. Never do 2 things halfway. Fully commit to one. Ron Swanson, Parks and Recreation. It holds significance. Reference this often. Story 77. God is no tuna. This was written in one of the sidewalks at college when the cement was still wet. It lasted for years, and I never figured it out. Story 78. Paper is made from tree pulp? You mean like in orange juice? Asked a student in the 8th grade technology class. Story 79. The worst thing you can do in a mosh pit is lose control. I pointed out to the person that this is the wrong outcome in most situations. Story 80. I knew a kid in high school who sang rap lyrics incorrectly in 1990. I have been stuck with a phrase from the song repeating in my head for over 30 years. Story 81. When you slice a tomato, it will attempt to grow back. I learned this during my training at a fast food job when I was younger, so I shared it with my trainees as well. However, one of the trainees returned the next day to tell me that their mom said tomatoes won't try to fuse together because they are not aliens. Story 82. The Liberal Party in Canada recently won the election, and a Canadian girl on Instagram stated that they needed Donald Trump to come liberate them from the Liberals. Story 83. I had a friend when I was 12 who insisted the lyrics to "These are a few of my favorite things" were "when the door bites" and not "when the dog bites." I think of it every time I hear that song. Story 84. I came across this on Reddit. Stay in school, kids. Story 85. I have kept a note on my phone of these for the past 4 years. Here are a few examples. BDSM? What is that? Buddhism? I do not care what anyone else says. Feet are more unique than hands. In my head, I sound like a Linder ball. They say that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Is closet spelled closest? Story 86. Person A. A lot of the houses in town are older, but luckily mine was built in 2013, so I don't have to deal with all the old house problems. Person B. Oh, like ghosts. Story 87. I am a host and cook at a restaurant. Sometimes I forget to ask the table if they want water, so I will just grab it and drop it off because everyone needs water. It gets really hot in my job because it's a Japanese barbecue place, so there are grills on all the tables. I sat a man whose friend was outside smoking. I got the waters and placed them on the table. He said, "Oh, sorry. I would have said no to the water. We don't actually drink water." He was a grown man in his late 30s at least. It took me a second to respond because I had never heard anyone say they don't drink water like that and actually mean it, but he did. Story 88. On holiday in Turkey, we stopped by a lake, and the guide mentions that in the summer it is usually full of flamingos. A woman on the bus asks where they are now, and a man explains they migrate to Africa in the winter. She frowns and asks how they get there. They fly. They can fly. Story 89. Many years ago in high school, a track teammate told me that if I held my thumb and index finger together while running my races, it would make me a better runner. For some reason, that advice stuck with me, even though I couldn't tell if it actually improved my performance. It just made me feel better. Many years later, I discovered that people hold their thumb and index finger together during meditation to improve concentration and relieve stress. Perhaps there was something to the tip my friend gave me. Story 90. I have uneven, hairy nipples. You at least look fit. I don't have a chance with her. This was a random conversation I overheard while walking between buildings at university. Story 91. A high school friend who was extremely conservative and supportive of the oil and gas industry would often criticize wind turbines for using more energy to produce than they could realistically generate over their serviceable life. I have never actually fact-checked this, but it seemed absolutely ridiculous. Story 92. I got off an airplane in Fairbanks, Alaska, one time and asked my friend which way north was. He pointed and said, "That way." I said it seemed like south to me, to which he replied, "If we were back home, it would be." Story 93. Are you experiencing the emotion you are feeling right now? Or are you attempting to feel the emotion prior to the one you are currently experiencing? Credit, Dave Rzowski. Story 94. Isn't it amazing how saying sentences backwards creates backwards sentences that highlight how incredible it is? It's the most perfect sentence I've ever encountered, and my appreciation for it grows every time I reflect on it. Story 95. Turns out that the man was innocent and should never have been arrested. My coworker said he was probably going to commit a crime eventually. Story 96. This is dated around 1988, but we were watching The Whales of August starring Betty Davis with my wife's family. Her college-age sister intently watched the movie, then in the middle turned and said, "I don't see what's so great about her eyes." Bet was 79 during filming. Story 97. I taught English in Brazil in 2011. After class, I was talking to a student outside who had better English than most. I don't remember the exact topic, but I said, "Things happen," and he flicked a cigarette into his mouth and replied wisely, "Things occur," before lighting his smoke. Nobody has ever laughed as hard as I did that day. It really got me good. Story 98. In third grade, a kid on the playground told me, completely seriously, "If you eat a watermelon seed and then drink Pepsi, the watermelon will explode out of your chest like in the movie Alien." I've never forgotten that, and I still hesitate a little when I eat watermelon. Story 99. Mark my words, within 10 years of leaving office, George W. Bush will be ranked among the greatest United States presidents of all time. Story 100. Only in America. A woman sued a company that made contraceptive jelly because she consumed it on her toast and still became pregnant. Story 101. In ninth grade science, the teacher handed out maps of the United States for some reason. A girl suddenly asked, "Why does it say New Mexico?" When prompted, she added, "New Mexico isn't a state, is it?" Then her face turned red. I still wonder how she reached ninth grade without knowing that New Mexico is a U.S. state. It was strange because she performed well in all our classes and wasn't cheating. I don't know if she just had a momentary lapse or if she was never exposed to any information about New Mexico before. Story 102. In middle school, we were on a field trip and kids were roughhousing. A girl got pushed a little too hard and tripped. She immediately grabbed her ear and started jumping around, frantically looking around, and then began crying with tears and snot everywhere. We were all wondering what was wrong and if she was hurt. She then started frantically telling us that she was Polish and that part of her ear that makes her Polish fell out, which meant she wasn't Polish anymore and her parents would be very angry if we didn't find it. I'm Polish, and I had never heard of this in my life. I still have no idea what she was talking about, but she was genuinely upset. She really thought she would be disowned by her family because a piece of her ear randomly detached. Story 103. I remember in high school we were discussing a criminal case where a pregnant woman had her baby cut out of her. I'm not sure if this actually happened or if it's just an urban legend or movie plot, but at the time we all believed it was real. One girl chimed in, "Oh my God, did they put it back in?" Story 104. You cannot prove that air exists. Story 105. If you cut your nipple off, will it grow back? My friend and I were walking to physical education in high school when we heard two other guys passing by say that. We stopped and looked at each other, wondering if that really just happened. Story 106. Some person commented, "Why are you black?" on a black girl's selfie. Another person responded, "Is this an actual comment that a real person wrote?" Story 107. 1 out of 7 people is gay. I am not sure if that's true. It might be inaccurate, but I heard it, and now I cannot get it out of my head. In my class, there are 14 people, so I keep wondering who those 2 people might be. Story 108. Years ago, when I was still in the United States, I walked by 2 men. One was loudly saying, "That's what she said. Give her what she needs in bed. Lick that until it turns red. That's what she said," while the other kept repeating, "Whoa, that's something," while flailing his arms. For some reason, I never forgot this. Story 109. There is a man in the sky who loves you, but if you do not show admiration for his son, Jesus, then you will suffer eternally. Now that I am older, I recognize in my mind that it is all false, yet I still fear what lies ahead. The most disappointing aspect is that Jesus appears to be an absolute failure, concealed behind 20 centuries of misleading information. Story 110. I once heard from someone that in order to lose weight, that person would use a vape until the hunger went away. Story 111. Hearing and listening aren't the same thing. The high school history teacher often went unnoticed by me. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.